things that have come up over the last year that have left questions in your mind. You get a chance to talk about them, but basically you just kind of get a refresher on everything. And we'll do this pretty quickly, and hopefully this will be helpful to you. So, oops, what are we doing here? You see that the meeting is being recorded? Do I need to do something to turn that off?
You have to click got it.
Oh, I have to click got it. Okay, hang on a second, guys.
So it's not a secret.
Okay,
California laws.
there we go. I'll go back to what I was doing. Sorry.
Just go down to the bottom.
Oh, did I do it?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so quickly then, just remember why the rules, why are we even having the seminar? You know, it's really all about safety. It's about making sure that we don't run into one another, and it's to make sure that we enjoy ourselves when we're out there, so that we don't feel like we are in situations that are uncomfortable and we're not sure what we're supposed to do or what the other guy is going to do. And so in a lot of ways, the whole game here for us on the race course is to make sure that we all have the same working knowledge of the rules, hopefully, or at least a pretty good working knowledge. And then more importantly, why is it shifting? More importantly, you have a way of communicating to other boats what you're doing, or at least you have a way of showing them what you plan to do. So remember, the rules are all written for two boats. So every time you look at a rule and you're interpreting it, it's always going to talk about two boats, boat A and boat B, boat B. And if you got six boats, it's always the context, the question between what happened to be A, what happened to B, what's A to C, A to D, and so forth. Okay, but usually the risk of collision is with one other boat. So hopefully not more than that. So this is a nasty one, right? And just so that's one of the reasons we have the rules. We want to avoid this. And of course, we've had this right in the club quite a bit. So we have to be very careful. It happens naturally, and it's usually not a lack of knowledge of the rules. And I'll talk a little bit about what I think we can do to just be safer out there. Second main reason for the rules is fairness. And so whenever you look at the rules, recognize that everything when I've studied this, it really is about those two things. And so if you have a question about the rule, you're pretty good if you ask yourself, what would be the safe thing first? And then secondly, does it seem like it's unfair? And if either one of those litmus tests doesn't feel right to you, that's a good time to kind of look at the rule and figure out what's wrong here, because it almost always is true that it is either a safety thing or it improves the fairness of the racing. If it doesn't look that way to you, then there's probably something you don't understand in the rules, or the other guy doesn't understand the rules. Okay, so the rule book, if you haven't gotten it, this is the 2021 rule book. There aren't a lot of changes, but gosh, this thing is shifting by itself. Anyway, there's the book right there. So a lot of parts to it, nothing new here. We're going to be going over part one very briefly. And then we'll spend most of our time in part two, which is where boats meet. And that's pretty much where all the things are we think of as the main rules. Of course, there's a lot of other things to know about racing in the rules, but none of those do you really have to have off the top of your head. You can pretty much look those up. So the basic principle really is about sportsmanship and the rules. And part one is about, it basically says you'll be a good sport and you'll follow the rules. We all agree to follow the rules. Is kind of what part one is all about. And then there's a component for environmental responsibility. And that kind of concludes part one. So then we jump right away to part two. Part two is where boats meet. And this is all the things that could cause a collision. Most everything else is about processes for running the race, processes for going around the race course, processes for becoming eligible, processes for protesting, et cetera, et cetera. So, but for the racers, you really only need to think about this one and have these kind of under your belt. And this is what we're going to sharpen for everybody. There are now 14 rules. There used to be 15, but there are now 14 rules that you really need to know and know them pretty well. We'll go through them all today pretty quickly. And for the most part, you don't need to know the numbers, but there is kind of a system I use, and I'll go through that. That'll help you think about the rules. A comment about the book: if you haven't spent a lot of time looking at it, remember the definitions are really important. So there are a number of times when a rule is written, they'll have italics for a word, and that italics is important because the word could easily be interpreted by the the dictionary to mean a bunch of things. And the writer said, no, we mean by that, when we say starting line, we're very specific. What do we mean by a starting line? So for example, so you want to be sure you look at those things. And then the last on this is be comfortable with position diagrams. I don't think we do this enough, honestly, because I do a lot of the protests in the club, and we just don't do these position diagrams very much. This is what I mean by a position diagram. So this is just, all this does is it shows the direction the wind is blowing. It tries to look at the situation as it developed over time with 3 different places in time. Point number 1, point number 2, and point number 3. You try to figure out, well, this kind of gives you an idea how fast the boats were moving, how fast they were converging. And so you sort of, if you were really clever about it, you'd have graph paper and one line would represent 2 seconds of time or something like that. But it's not important. Generally speaking, just need to be able to draw them these way. And then you interpret what happened at point 1, point 2, and then point 3 is the point where there's usually a collision, or if there's going to be a problem, a protest. And that's where you have to interpret the rule. And it's good to see how it developed. Okay, a little bit about the 21-24 update. So every 4 years, the committee gets together, ISFA, get together and decide whether or not there are any changes need to be made to the rules. And usually these are about definitions, or they're about some clarification that happened throughout the last 4 years where people got confused in the rules. And so they said, no, we got to make this simpler. A good example of this, if you go back 20 years, was the introduction of the 3-boat length circle, which didn't exist in the original rules. It just talked about when you came to a mark. And then they finally said, we gotta tighten this thing up. There's just too many problems if you don't talk about a 3-boat length circle. And so there's a whole set of rules that happen. So that's an example of things that change. There have been some things that have changed here. Basically, I will describe what they are right now. It used to be that the finish line and the starting line was all defined by the furthest point on your boat, the bowsprit and the kite. It is no longer that way. It's your bow. So now the bow defines the front of your boat, not the thing that's sticking off of the bow. So just remember that matters. Overlap is now your bow. It's not the bowsprit. So they just said, look, there's just too much distinction between different boats and people putting more kites out. And we're just going to go to a pretty common way of thinking about it. So now it's just your bow. And that's true for the start, the finish. And so that shows up here. Sail the course was a change. It used to be in the addendum somewhere buried was a description about what does it mean to sail a race course. If you ever had this discussion about the string that goes around the race course and you have to unwrap the string, if you go around a mark the wrong way, you've got to unwrap the string and go the right way. Well, anyway, all of that is now described in how you sail a course in one of the different parts. So that's one of the things that changed. There are a bunch of flags they introduced. That changed. There's a change, for example, in Rule 20. You can now, it used to say in 20, which was about hailing for room to tack. Now you can use a horn. If the SIs say you can use a horn, then now you can use a horn instead of hailing. It's just an example. Otherwise, I'll cover everything else that happens on the rules. So here's my simple way of thinking about the rules. The rules really are, there are 4 sections under this, A, B, C, and D under part 2. If you haven't gotten one, I had these made up. Oh, Hans, if you picked these up before, these different color cards. Okay, anyway, these are just if you haven't got them, we'll have them in the club somewhere, but they're 3 different color cards. They cover all 4 parts of all 4 sections of part 2. And anyway, just a simple reference. But the thing to note here about the rules that you want to grasp is that part A and B, which are 8 rules, those always apply. They always apply. And everything else are limitations. So you don't lose your right of way just because you're coming around a mark, for instance. You are limited by how much you can force somebody to do something. But it's a limitation for a period of time, and then it goes away. So that's a limitation around the marks. But you don't lose your right of way because somebody is now on the inside of you or the outside of you. You keep them. So I think almost everybody knows then, so this is how I think about them, and I have these 4 cards, as I mentioned, these 4 different sections. So there's section A, B, C, and D, and we'll cover them in detail here. So, okay, so let's go over section A, which is, I think everybody knows all 4 of these rules, so I don't even need to spend any time here. These are basically the 4 different conditions you can be in when 2 boats are sailing against one another, and one of you is the boat that has the right of way, which means you're the one who's supposed to keep going the way you're going, and the other one is supposed to just avoid you. That's just as simple as it is. Okay, nothing more to know about that. Remember, when you're changing course, you kind of are now lose. That's what 413 is about. You lose your rights when you're changing course. You don't have rights anymore. You're changing course. Not surprisingly, from a safety point of view, you can't exactly hold your course if you're changing your course. So the idea is the right-of-way boat holds its course, the other boat ducks them, avoids them, and all is good. Okay, but when you're changing, well, then you really have to avoid the other guy. Okay, that's what that really means. So clearly, you have an immediate problem, and we'll get to that when we talk about the marks. Marks are all about changing course. So everybody going around a mark is in that state. And that's why you end up having this whole section 18, the whole thing about going around marks, this limitation. All right.
Can you elaborate on 13? So I know you lose your right of way when you tack, but at some point, well, actually, if you're on port tack and you tack in front of another boat, it's very hard for me to tell how far away I have to be before I have enough movement on starboard to be considered right of way.
Okay, so that's a good question, because it leads right to the limitation side of this. Okay, so clearly when you're about to tack, or as you are tacking, you don't have the right of way. So if you tack in such a way that the person next to you couldn't avoid you because they didn't anticipate you moving, then you would be violating, you would have broken rule 13. Okay, but let's take a look then what happens here. I'll come to this, go right to that, and then I'll come back to my other slide. So this is the changing course and acquiring right of way are your 2 questions. They're both applied. So this says that when you acquire your right of way, your case of tacking from port to starboard, okay, you are limited in your right of way. You do not yet have right of way completely until you have allowed the boats in your immediate vicinity time to react. Subjective question: how much time is enough time? Okay, the answer should be, I would say 3 to 4 seconds is a good number. If you tack on to starboard and the other guy saw you tack, that's a big question mark, but if they saw you tack and you counted to 1,004, you would have given them plenty of time to react, because they should have started to react at 1,001, right? Start to think about the duck, we have to get ready for a duck, and so forth. Okay, so you have to use your good judgment, but basically this is what that says, is that you must allow enough time when you tack onto starboard. The minute that sail dropped onto the other side of the boat that you were on starboard, how much time passed between that and the altercation? And you want to make that time, in our case, you want to make that time in 5 seconds, 2 seconds you're pushing it. On a dinghy, you might, the rules might be it's perfectly okay if you do that in 1.5 seconds, because people can react so quickly. In a big blow, very different. Big blow downwind with a kite up, another matter altogether. So again, you have to, that's the rule, is it's vague. It says you must allow the other boat with reasonable seamanship, it's the definition, to react to the change in your state. Okay, same thing with changing course. I change course. Did I give you enough time to react to my changing of my course? Okay, so this is particularly useful, for example, when you are jockeying with one another before the start, because what are you doing there? You're changing course like crazy. you're slowing down, speeding up, slowing down, speeding up. The other guy's like, well, I'm not sure where's he going, and you're arguing, I'm trying to start. They're arguing, I'm trying to get around you. But, so that's kind of how that plays. Yeah.
How would you modify that single-handed racing? There's a 2 or 3 or 4 seconds.
Yeah, it's the same game. You modify it always for the condition. So the rule says for the condition, standard seamanship applies. So you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be like super pro. You can't use that.
But in situations I've been in, the person single-handed wasn't even in the cockpit. They're up forward trying to.
Yeah, no. So now remember, it doesn't say that you gave them enough time that they were able to respond. What it says is that it was normal seamanship applies. Now, if normal seamanship would not say you can be out of the cockpit, right? You have to be in control of your vessel at all times and be able to respond. It doesn't also say that you've got crews that don't know what they're doing. They can't possibly take a kite down and do anything. Now, you and I should know that with our fellow sailors. We should sort of know that, no, I'm not going to do that to that team. That team picks up lots and lots of, every Wednesday night, Revelry picks up a whole bunch of new people. If they're flying a kite, don't play games with them and force them into a jibe with a kite or a takedown or whatever it might be. So
my conclusion had been, if I could see the other person single-handing the boat was not in a position to react quickly, I'm not going to force the situation.
which is totally, now this is a whole different question, right? The whole different question is, what's the rule say you can do and what should you do? And the answer is you should stay the heck away from some people. I mean, I don't know about you, but I absolutely have my favorites, I just don't get close to them because, and then there's the ones that I like to dice it up with because I have a lot of confidence. I feel like I can sail the boat almost like a dinghy with them because I see them, I see their eyes, I know what they're doing. They've got a good team. They kind of like the close quarters. We both enjoy it. That's great. Game on. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, so let me back up. We've had some scrape ups on the club, so I thought I would, it'd be foolish of me not to talk about those because the whole point of this is to sharpen our skills and to avoid issues, right? So let's talk about where we had problems and see if there was something we could have done independent of the rules. What could we have done differently? Probably the most important thing you can do on the boat, if you have a safety discussion at all with your team, is to remind every single person on the boat, even the person who has no sailing experience whatsoever that you've invited to come on board, that they have 2 sets of eyes and they have a set of eyes and that you want to use everybody's eyes on the boat to help you. And the helm on a big boat, as Hans knows, and Mark, that you can't see tons of stuff. So you just need everybody to be looking. And the answer should be and I say this to the helms, you should say to everybody, please yell out if you see anything I could hit in the next, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, more maybe, depends on the situation. And the only answer you should get back is got it. Somebody says, I see the starboard back boat. Don't berate people for telling you what's obvious to you. Just say thank you. Good. And you know what? Every incident that we've had in the club with a port starboard always started with, I didn't see the other boat. Experienced sailor, I just didn't see them, says the helm, the one person who could have done something. And yeah, maybe somebody should have mentioned it, but we didn't. We were busy. We were putting the kite up. Everybody was heads down. So just remind the crew that that's their number one job, is to keep you out of trouble if you're the helm. And treat them accordingly. Another one that we can avoid is with big boats, distance between boats is a huge margin of safety for you. So I just encourage us all to kind of agree. This is not in the rules, but if we could all agree that anything inside of 6 feet is close, especially for a 40-foot boat, not so for a dinghy, but for a 40-foot boat, 6 feet is looks like 45-degree down. You see the bottom of their boat. And if you're in your other boat, you're looking up 45 degrees. If they're Mark's boat, you're looking up steeply because you're only 6 feet away. It's not very far. So if we just agree that 6 feet's close, then don't get closer than that. If you find yourself getting closer than that, you've used up all your margin, and then say to yourself, what did I do wrong that I had to use up that margin? I got within 2 feet, which means I couldn't even keep it 6 feet away. So I lost all my margin. So if we just keep that as kind of a mantra for ourselves, 6 feet is the room we want to have between boats. Let's keep it there. Let's not duck 2 feet behind or 1 foot behind. Let's duck 6 feet behind. And 6 feet is in. It may seem like a lot, but it's not. It's pretty darn close. And for some people, they would prefer that you duck 30 feet away, but fair enough. But 6 feet is kind of a minimum from my point of view.
Mind if I add to your comments?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Point. The 2 boats are side by side, that close. When the one boat tries to turn away, their stern.
Yeah, absolutely.
Want to go 3 feet closer to the other boat.
Exactly right. You've lost all the margin. Exactly my point. Yeah. So, and really, and I will then say this in other parts of the presentation as well. This is a performance statement, and Stan said, please talk about performance as well. Nothing will slow your boat faster than the shadow of another boat. So stay away from other boats and you will keep the engine running at full speed. Get close to other boats, you slow your boat down. So you want performance, keep yourself as clear as you possibly can from other boats. Plus, of course, it makes the rules a lot simpler. So, okay. Also, not a bad idea to have a horn. So if you don't have one if you don't have one automatically on your console because you have one of those big boats, if you don't, a whistle, that's fine, but something. And then I would also say as a group, use helm-to-helm communications is the final confirmation of things. So if you can't see the helm, they can't see you. Remember that. So just because the bowman is waving like crazy, you don't know what the bowman is saying. And the bowman is not driving the boat. You're counting on them to communicate to the line, what's happening. So that you see things like the bowman calling you through. I don't use that one. Don't get taken to that one. Make sure you've got eyes. If you got eyes on the other guy, then that's a good sign. All right. The other thing that really, really helps is if you want to know where a boat's going to go, take a look at what it's pointing at. Therefore, if you want to communicate what you're going to do with your boat, point your boat where you're going to go. So if you're going to duck somebody, point very early on. You won't lose anything. Point at their stern, and it becomes very clear you intend to duck. And then you can start coming up and then pass 6 feet to the stern. But if you point early, the other guy will see you. Everyone will see you. They'll all say, well, he's behind us. Whether they are or not doesn't matter. The point is that will be communicated thoroughly, and you'll have less chance that we won't have any scrape ups. Hopefully we'll get through a whole year without anybody running into anybody. Okay.
By horn, do you mean speaker horn or
anything? A noise maker that's not a hail. So in 20 knots of breeze, don't waste your time yelling starboard. Don't waste your time. You're going to make everybody on your own boat nervous, and the other guy won't hear you at all. 3 blasts on any kind of horn, they'll probably hear it. And then you look to see if they change direction or not. If they change direction, then they see it. Oh yeah, big boat, Marikai. Don't want to get near that guy. Okay.
Should be 3 or 5.
No, it's not 5. It's just enough. It's an alert. We're not trying to do 5 big horns. If you hear 5 big horns, it means somebody's really screwed up because it's a big ship making a lot of noise. So you don't want to hear those. All right. So that is it with regard to the limitations. Really, you can't ever hit somebody and cause serious damage. If you do, like the picture before, you've broken rule 14. It doesn't matter whether you're in the right of way or not. Okay, doesn't matter at all. You cause serious damage, you've broken rule 14. If you change course or you're acquired the right of way, but you didn't give enough time, you have a problem. Potentially, it's a limitation. And then last but not least, this is worth a picture. Same tack, proper course. We always have this discussion. I'll do it again. This is what it means. This is it was designed when a faster boat overtakes another boat. The idea is that when the faster boat overtakes the other boat and acquired right of way, because they were beneath them, right? They're the leeward boat. So you see that picture, leeward boat acquired the right of way. They are not allowed to just luff the guy up. Happens in little dinghy racing all the time when you want to luff a guy up just to mess him up. Okay, you can't do that. The right of way the right-of-way boat has to sail their proper course, which again, you can look up the definition, but fundamentally just means the shortest coast, shortest path to the mark. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the time, and I'll give you the example here that sometimes messes us up for two different kinds of boats. So this is rule 17, where you've got a sport boat. That's the one on the left coming in at an angle, and the other boat, which is coming straight downwind. Big boat, got a kite up. Okay, so they're both on their proper course. They're both trying to get downwind, but one jives downwind and the other just goes straight downwind. They're both on their proper course. Okay, the boat that acquired the right of way, in this case, this one right here, they acquired the right of way and they're on their proper course. Okay, so the sport boat can theoretically drive up the starboard boat in this situation. I mean, the what would be now the windward boat, they could drive them up. Okay, and they're flying a kite, and that's a mess. And don't do it if you're the sport boat and the faster boat. Just don't do it. Okay, but you should be aware, if you are a big boat going slow with the kite dead downwind and a sport boat's coming down on the same tack as you, approaching you, they in theory have the right of way. And you really want to encourage them not to exercise that right. Go jibe away. They're faster boat. Jibe away. Go be fast someplace else. And then when you come back, you won't be near me. So it won't matter. Right? It won't matter because you'll be gone. All right. Is that clear? So that's it. Now you know now you know of the 14 rules, you know 8. Cold. You know them well. They apply all the time. Okay. And you don't need to spend any time worrying about it. Okay. Except making sure that you see the other boats, because if you don't see them, applying the rules becomes sort of irrelevant. You just run into them. Okay. Okay. So we're going to shift gears now. We're going to go to the two most complicated rules in the entire book, and they are the ones that throw everybody off. And all we're going to do is I'm going to give you examples. Don't try to memorize the numbers. Just try to see the different scenarios and kind of build them into your repertoire. Okay. They're both rules, rule 18 and rule 19, and they're both really about what do you do when you've got to go around something, another boat, a mark. So you're changing course, you're doing stuff, and there's multiple of you doing that at the same time. Okay. How do I manage that so that we all get around it safely with the least amount of hassle? Okay, that's the objective, safe and fair around things. All right. So these two rules, this is just for those people who like to sort of know numbers and how they work. These two rules use exactly the same method for describing themselves. So 18.1 and 19.1, they both talk about when the rule applies. .2 describes when the rule is. Again, I wouldn't worry about memorizing the rules that way. Just know that it's rule 18 when it comes to marks, rule 19 for everything else that you have to avoid. Okay, so let's talk about what those things look like. Okay, so 19 is the simplest case because it's everything else. Marks is just a single thing. 19 is everything else. And 19 is important because 19 involves what we call boundary conditions, and we have those in the channel. So it's worth spending some time talking about what happens in a boundary condition. Okay, those are called continuing obstructions. If we have a restricted zone that you're not allowed to cross over, we're going to change our SIs. By the way, they are not right written. They kind of got changed and we need to change them back. But we want to have boundaries, and the boundaries are the things between our two red marks all the way up the channel and the green marks. And you're not supposed to cross that line. Okay, that's a boundary. And you're also protected. If you are on against the boundary, you have some protection because of rule 19, because you're not allowed to cross the line. It becomes an obstruction. All right, so here's all the examples of things, clearly things that would cause troubles. All of these things you know. Another racing boat is an obstruction as long as it has the right of way over you. So a bunch of port tacking boats coming upon a starboard boat is a good example. The starboard boat is an obstruction because everybody on port has to avoid that starboard boat. So that becomes complicated. We need to move. Who's going to move? And so that we'll talk about that. All right. All right. So I'm not going to go through this in the details, except I'll give you examples, lots of examples. All right. All right. So the first fundamental rule is that if you're the right-of-way boat, in this case, the leeward boat, two port boats, the leeward boat, and you come upon something that you have to get around. Okay. You, as the right-of-way boat, get to decide, am I going to go above it, in this case, or below it? Okay. You get to decide. And the other boat has to stay out of your way, just like normal. If you make a slow adjusting change, the other boat has to stay out of your way, the windward boat, right? You get to decide. However, if you decide to go beneath it, you got to let the other guy do the same thing. A little tricky. So in essence, the way to think about 19 is that the rule says you aren't allowed to run people into stuff. Okay, so if you can trap somebody and run them into something, it's probably not, it's not in the rules. It's against the rules. It's against the concept of the rules. There is one exception. One exception. Does everybody know what that exception is? It's a very dangerous place where there's stuff that you can run into and everybody's trying to get there. It's at the start. Okay. Yeah. So at a start, you have a committee boat or two marks, and you are on, all birdies on starboard, right? Same kind of thing here. The leeward boat decides he wants, I don't know why they'd want to start anywhere other than where they're supposed to start, but they want to start as close to the mark as they can. And that squeezes a whole bunch of people out. Okay. And they, in theory, if that thing was a big thing, like a big motorboat, they could, in theory, drive them into the motorboat. Okay. In theory. So that's the only exception, that basically you can't drive somebody into something. And remember this, and this is an important piece of barging. This is the barging rules. You guys know what I mean by barging? Barging is when you force somebody into, when you try to find a way into a starting line when there wasn't any room for you. That is, everybody was lined up and then you wanted to come and find this place and you wanted people to move down so that you could find a way in. That's called barging. And you can't do it. It's not in the rules. It's not called barging in the rules. It's just what it is. It's what it's colloquially known as. If you get in there, if you get your nose in there, however, and at the time the guy decides to come up, let's say it's a committee boat. If he decides to come up, he can't push you into the committee boat once it's too late for you to do anything about it. Okay, that is a violation of the rules. So it's kind of a little, I'll describe it. Once you don't let somebody get their nose in someplace they're not supposed to go, because if they do, and then you wait and wait and wait, and then start and decide to head them up, you can't, because they can't do anything about it once they're in there. Okay, so it's really small objects, not an issue. They would just go around it. Big objects, a little different. Okay, so also would be true of a barge that's cleaning the bay, would be an example of an obstruction. So again, you can't squeeze somebody into stuff. We don't want to do that anyway, but that's just important to know. Yeah. Stan.
So this is actually the question I couldn't answer to one of my crew this week.
Okay.
It said, okay, I gotta have the refresher class.
Yeah. Okay, good. Here you are.
So this is only at the start line. At the finish line, you can scrape them off.
No, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. Only at the start line. At the finish line is a mark like any mark.
Okay.
And rule 18 applies. So a finish line is, which we'll talk about rule 18, but a finish line is a mark. And once a person gets in with a three boat lengths of the finish line, they have a right. And you have to let them get in there. You have to fall off. You can't close them out at the finish line.
That was the question.
Yeah, that's the answer. You can't close them out. Only place it applies where you close somebody out, push them into something, is at the start. Okay.
Philip, I have an online question from Peter White.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
But you can run yourself into stuff, i.e. when there are two boats stacked up on the upper edge of the channel next to each other, and there's a third boat coming from behind fast, they can't stick their nose in between the two boats, even if their bow fits, right?
Correct. And we're going to talk about that.
Actually, it was Anya.
Yeah, and that's correct. She's right. And I'll show examples of that because we had this happen. So I have examples of all the ones we've had real problems with. Okay. So anyway, this is the first most important part of rule 19. You get to decide where you go. All right. Here's another example. This can happen to you. Port tacker is coming in on a starboard tack at the windward mark. Okay. The leeward boat here, the port tack boat, he sees there's a very clear opportunity to go between the lead boat and the boats that are following. Okay, so he can go there. Question, can he go there? What if he can't put what if maybe two boats don't fit? Okay, and the answer, if two boats don't fit, this is what rule 19B 2B says. If they didn't exist, if the opportunity could not have existed for them to go, you don't have to give them the room. That is, the windward boat has to tack away and you can still go through the hole. So does that make sense?
The boat in the lead can go through?
Yes.
And the second boat needs to.
Yeah, the second boat would say, wait a minute, I thought that if you wanted to go and duck the lead boat, I could duck the lead boat. And the answer is only if it's possible.
So, but that's different to what you said before, that the lead boat, the lead port tacker.
Yep.
Needs to leave room for the other boat.
And
if he can't, that boat can't do that because he's going to be colliding with the second. lead
yes,
boat.
exactly.
Then he's got to duck. That's interesting. That means he's got to duck all three boats.
No.
And that
no.
leaves room for the boat behind him to take.
Yeah. So remember, this is why the rule was written this way. Okay, it's a caveat. You must allow room for the other boat if you can allow room. But in this case, you can't allow the room because the room doesn't exist. There's room for me, but there's not room for you. Sorry about that. And now you do not have to comply. You can go between the boats if you're safely doing it, and the other guy can't duck enough to make room, to guarantee room for him.
Right.
And imagine three of you packed up.
So if the two green boats on the right weren't there, you'd have to give them
Yes,
room.
correct.
So both of you could duck.
Absolutely. That's exactly the point. Now you understand the point. If you can give room, you have to give it. But if you can't give room, then you can't give room. That's the point. You can't give you room I don't have, right? I don't make up these other boats. I don't make where they go. So you have to drive with the idea that, oh, shoot, we're getting pretty close here. So do I want to duck the whole fleet? Do I want to take a chance that he comes down on me, even though, and tries to squeeze with us, right? Because now it's really messy. So anyway, but this is where you would look for the rule.
So what if the red boat on the right did not think there was room and wanted to tack? They couldn't tack in front of the other boat. So is that, can you? call for
Oh,
room
yes,
to
okay,
tack,
yeah,
or
yes,
what
okay,
can
yes, you can. And we're gonna get to that. You're ahead of the game.
Okay, so.
Rule 20 says room to tack. It's an option you have. It's the last thing we have in this section. And he has another choice. And his other choice is room to tack, the right-of-way boat. Because he's going to, and we'll go through that rule, okay? But that's exactly what he could do. He could decide it's not safe. And he wants to tack.
Outside the three boats in the circle.
Doesn't matter.
Approaching a mark, right?
Yes, outside, yes, absolutely. If this is, notice there's no circle here, right? Rule 19 applies when rule 18 doesn't apply. Three boat length circles means there's a mark, which means 19 doesn't apply. Remember, it's only one or the other. So obstructions around marks, they have three boat length circles, and we'll go through that, all right? It can get confusing, it's okay, but just get familiar with the scenarios. If you don't have to memorize the rules as much as sort of see the scenario, that's why we have the refresher. You stay sharp. Oh yeah, I remember that one. I remember that. I haven't seen that in forever, but I just saw it again. Yeah, I remember now. I can't do that. I don't remember why exactly, but I can't do that. So if you keep that much in mind, you're doing great. All right, let's talk about coming down the channel. Okay, and this is obstruction. Again, we're talking about that mark, the imaginary mark between the red marks, the red day marks. You're not allowed to, let's say that's a real thing. We call that a barrier. It's a boundary. It's a restricted area. Okay, if you're ahead, if you're behind and you want to overtake, this is a little bit what Anya's going to talk to, but I have many examples of this. You have to stay clear. Okay, so if you're coming down the line, going down, coming home, got red marks on your right, flying your kite, you're kind of on the line. Nobody should come up from behind you, hit you. Nobody should try to pass you on the part that would force them over the line. They should pass you on the other side. All right. So this is about obstruction, continuing obstructions. Okay. You can't stick your nose in there. Just because you do If you stick your nose in there, but there was never room for you in the first place, then you've violated the rule. And that's what this says. Okay, so what do you do if you're the skipper? You turn around and you yell to the boat coming up, to the bowman probably of the boat coming up, who's coming up slowly. You may be going fast, but he's going a little bit faster. You yell, there is no room here. No room here. Okay, you got to go beneath me. There's no room above me. Don't stick your nose in there. Okay, and hopefully they'll get it. Oh, I see. I'm not supposed to do that. All right. Turns out if you do stick your nose in there, that's what the rule says. If you do stick your nose in there and you jibe over to starboard and say, aha, now I'm starboard. So starboard applies and port doesn't apply anymore. That works just fine as long as you do it before you catch the guy. But if you do it after you've created an overlap, the rule doesn't turn off. That's what this rule says. It's kind of makes sense, right? If you didn't have rights and you were overlapped and then suddenly you jibe over, you got instantaneous rights, but there was no room in the first place, something's wrong. And that's what this basically says. All right. Now, remember that Rule 19, now again, this is in the channel, so that's why I'm bringing these up. These are channel related kind of rules. If you're going upwind, Rule 19 does not apply. You cannot use a boundary rule if you're going upwind. Yeah.
My mind is still at the prior picture.
Oh, okay. Let me go back to the prior
I'm
picture.
trying to digest it. That one there. So this is typically our channel, right? I see marker 10 and marker 8 sitting there.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, there's also a rule that if I am the faster boat and I try to pass a slower boat, that slower boat is the ROW boat, right?
No. So I'll explain. This is a very good question because it's one of those places where the call regs, the rules of the sea provided by the Coast Guard, don't agree with the rules of racing. Okay. In call regs, in the general rule of things, a boat that is coming up from behind, right, never has a right of way, never gains right of way when they're passing another boat in the normal Coast Guard of things. Okay, so you're absolutely right. That is the rule of the Coast Guard. Once you've decided to race, that rule does not exist anymore. The boat behind cannot hit the boat in front, but once the boat from behind establishes an overlap, they can become the right of way boat. And that's completely different than the coal rigs. Okay, so it's a very good question because lots of seasoned sailors go out and race. They know the coal rig's cold. They know that the boat coming from behind and who's overtaking does not have the right over the one that is being overtaken. But in this case, it's not the same. Okay, rules of racing are different. You can establish an overlap. Once you establish an overlap, you've got right of way. Not a good idea for general purposes, right? Because if you're not racing somebody and you overlap with them and now you tell them that you're right of way and then you try to move them by exercising your rights, they may not know what you're talking about, right? They may be out just having a sunset sail, literally, not caring about the racing at all. All right. So thank you for that question. Is a really good question. Can I go on? Okay. Here we are going upwind. Port tack boat is stuck against the channel going up, right? And thinks, oh, well, I'm against the channel, so I have rights. Because I remember something about, that boundary and I had rights. The answer is you don't. By Rule 19, why? Well, because you should think about this from a safety point of view. There's something you can do. You can slow down and you can duck. So that's what you should do. Okay. So if you're tacking out of the channel and you get stuck on the port tack up against the side of the channel or slightly reaching, okay, remember that a boat that's coming across has rights over you. Okay, and you have to slow down or duck or do something. Okay, they can force you to do whatever they want. Okay, because Rule 19 no longer applies. What does apply? Well, your red card, your basic 8 rules. That's what applies. So remember, the yellow card is all about limitations that you have, limits of when you can go in there. And like in the previous example, they don't really change the right of way per se. They just limit. Okay, so here are some cases. Anya was alluding to these. We've had these are case studies. They happened in our situation and caused lots of problems in our channel. That's why they're here. Okay, so just look at them, kind of take them in. Don't worry about the rule per se. Just learn what's right and what's not right. Okay, so you've got 3 boats. First situation, you got 3 boats coming along. In all of our cases that you'll see in these 3 cases, you have faster boats in the back. Okay, it never happens when the faster boat's in the front because you'll never catch anybody. So it's not a problem. It's only when the boats in the back are catching the ones in the front that this becomes a problem. So notice everybody here is on starboard tack. Everybody's coming down. The leeward boat is the one that's in the front. So that's kind of good. So they should have all the rights. Everything should be good. Now this is position number 2. Everybody's sort of gotten more collapsed, more pushed together, right? And point number 3 is basically that the orange boat had to stay on the outside the whole time, the faster boat. They couldn't put themselves in between those boats. Let's take a look at that from another point of view. Here's 4 boats. Again, the orange boat's the faster boat. Now he's faced with a line. Got 3 boats, pretty much the same. Everybody's on starboard, right? And he's coming down. And so what happens, and this actually happened in our races, comes down and says, oh, I want to be on the inside. There's enough room for me to put my bow in there. Come on, there's plenty of space. But there isn't plenty of space, right? Because if we take 6 feet and 6 feet and my boat, which is 10 feet, 12 feet, 14 feet, then that's 25 feet. There's not 25 feet between the boats, but there's probably 12 feet between the boats. Right? And so they go stick their nose in there thinking, move out, guys, move out of my way. And specifically thinks that they can move the green boat, the dark green boat, more towards the line because in theory, I can force him up. Okay. The fact of the matter is that guy's up against the line. And so he says, no, there's no room. Okay. But of course, once you stick your nose in there, as we all know, going downwind, there are no brakes. So even if you collapse the kite, you'll probably still keep going. Okay, so don't go in there. If you see this happen and you're one of those 3 boats, all 3 of those boats should be yelling to the other boat, go around, go around. By the way, it's the fastest way to beat those guys is to go around them all, assuming there's enough channel to do. Okay, so here's point. That's the main point of this one. Don't go in there. Okay. Last case study. Both boats are on port. Yeah, both boats are on port. They come together. I'm sorry, they're both on starboard. But here's the main point. The green boat, who was the leeward boat, left a lot of room here. Okay. And he didn't close the door early enough. Okay. So if the guy gets his nose in there, you're going to have to let him go. Okay. You're going to have to let him go. So the trick here is if you're the green guy in this position 1 and you want to close the door on the faster boat, you need to do that while you're still in front, while you're still the right-of-way boat. But if you wait till he gets next to you and then try to close the door, you can't do it. You know what I mean by close the door? Push him against. Okay. So those are the 3 cases. All 3 happened. In this one, the green boat protested because he went around me to windward of me, took my wind. And then I wanted to be near the boundary. Well, you need to be near the boundary if you want to be near the boundary. If you're not near the boundary, you can't claim it. Okay. So those are just examples. Rule 19 around boundaries. I think that's it for boundary stuff. So everybody got it pretty clear. So all the boundary things apply when we're going downwind. They do not apply when you're going upwind. Do not use a boundary rule going upwind. Unless, and there's an exception, you're both on the same tack, heading towards the edge of the channel. The leeward boat could ask the windward boat for room to tack. Yeah.
The explanation was really good. I just want to add to it
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So there's at least 2 places in the channel where that green blob you show there is the obstruction.
Yep.
The part that you run aground on.
Yep.
Really sticks out past that line between the marks.
Yeah,
So if I was the yellow boat in that case, well, that's probably not the best example. If I'm on that line and telling somebody there's no room, I don't have to be right up against that line that you've drawn between the marks. I've got to be where I think it is, with the shallow stuff underneath.
well, that's true. And I think the reality is if the restricted zone is defined by our marks, okay? If the marks are wrong, like we know one of the marks is too shallow for some boats, okay? Then we run into a problem because the rules don't really allow us to describe an obstacle that you can't see. So big problem has always existed. That's why we have the restricted line rule. Because if we don't, there's nothing in the rules that says it's an obstacle. If you can sail over it, it's not an obstacle to you. That it's an obstacle to somebody else is interesting, but irrelevant, right? So that's the problem with depth rules. It happened to St. Francis Yacht Club, to some big boat racing, where one guy gets up against the shore and the other guy says, hey, I can sail in there. Says, but I can't. And you can't prove that they forced you onto the land until you hit the land, which is not a good thing to do. So, and there were big Rolex race series, lots of protests, and you can imagine. So
it's not like proper course where it's the opinion of the boat.
Exactly right. It's not like proper course. Okay. All right. We're done with rule 19. Okay. And the boundary ones, which is the one I wanted you to be familiar with, because most of them are just about something in a log or something. And that's pretty straightforward. Or more importantly, a starboard tacking boat coming across where there's two of you trying to avoid it. Okay. That's the most likely one. Rule 18 now is the rule that introduces marks, right? It's the mark rule, and it introduces the whole idea of giving room, and it introduces the 3 boat length circle, okay? Why the 3 boat length circle? What the heck were they thinking? The answer was that the idea of it was we need more time. We can't wait till we get to the mark to decide whether or not there's enough room. We need more time. And so they said, we're going to make that time equal to 3 boat lengths. We think that's going to look like something like 6 to 8 seconds. So let's decide 8 seconds ahead of time who has rights and who doesn't, and then go about our business when we go around the mark. Let's not decide 1 second before we get there. That was the whole purpose of having the 3 boat length circle. Okay. You need to know for your boat what 3 boat lengths looks like, and you just need to know at what speed is 3 boat lengths for my boat. Okay. And be able to count that off in your head. And then you'll know, can I take the kite down in 3 boat lengths or not? Is my team fast enough to do that at this level and know it for each different condition? Then you'll know I got to start taking the kite down in 6 boat lengths. Okay? So I'm going to have to give up some space because somebody else might be able to take it down in 3 boat lengths. So they might be able to get there before I get my kite down. Okay. So you have to kind of have that in your head. Right. And I have advice for how to make this all work well for you, but which is basically give room. But nonetheless, that's the reason this got formed. All right. All right. So everybody goes around. Why do we have this rule in the first place? It's complicated, and because every race has marks. Everybody goes around them. Everybody uses boat length circles. So how do we make this process work well all the time? Because everybody's converging. Yeah.
It's kind of a general question, unrelated to your discussion probably, but
Yep.
Does it apply to boats in different races?
Yes, it does.
Because that happens out there.
It does. It does. It applies to all boats. So boats, it does not apply if the 2 of you are not going around the mark. So in other words, you can't call for room around a mark that the other guy's not going around.
Well, that even happens out here too.
I know, but you can't. Just bear that in mind. So if we hope it doesn't happen, but the Merritts decide to sail a starboard tack just right along the ley line of the thing you're going to go around. Okay. They're starboard tacking boat.
Sometimes you have the one fleet's going up the S, and the other's only going to 12 and around 12.
Yeah, this is
But to get
a
to S, you want to be right close to 12.
This is a race committee nightmare for multiple classes on the same race course, different speed boats. yeah, it's a real mess, right? It can be really nasty. So anyway, the answer is no, it doesn't. Remember, yellows are limitations. They relate to limitations. They don't change the fundamental right of way rule, right? They just change, you got to give them some room for a little while. But if they're not racing on the same race course with you, then it doesn't apply. You just have to apply but red always applies for two boats that are racing, even if they're racing in a different course. Okay, my rule, simple. It's faster, higher performance, it's more fun. So if any of you see Phoenix out there and we're in a converging situation and you wonder whether I'm going to give you room or not, remember this and I'll remember it. I'm going to give you room. I'm just not going to mess with you. Okay. It's just not fast. Okay. I don't want to sail your boat. I want to sail my boat. So, however, I'd like you to know the rules so that you don't run into me if I happen to be the slow boat going around the mark. All right. So let's talk about just examples. So let's go through a series of examples here. That's all. Okay. So the rule, when does the rule not apply? 18 doesn't apply at all, as I mentioned, when two boats are on opposite tacks going upwind. Okay. Port tack boat cannot ask for room against a starboard tacking boat. Okay. Doesn't work. Okay. Upwind. Okay. Same kind of thing's a special case. Again, I've given you the numbers there, but it's the same kind of thing. If you've got a boat reaching in, maybe running a different course, different part of the course, different time. But again, if you're on a port tack and you're coming to windward, you don't have any rights around the mark. Okay, you really don't have very many rights at all. You're a port tack boat. You have rights against another port tack boat. Okay. Now, if you're leaving the mark, you've left the mark. So the rule doesn't apply between a boat approaching the mark and approach leaving the mark. There's no three boat length circle anymore. Okay, one is finished. So now it's just port starboard again. Okay, right back to A, the rules you all know off the top of your head. Okay. Same thing with an island, because 19 applies. If we were going, let's race around the island and back. We don't have that. But if we did that, there's no three boat length circle around islands. Go around the island and come back. Okay, this is a problem, for example, with the race to the Farallones. How close should you be? Well, that's the problem, right? Go around an island, it can be problematic. People start getting closer and closer to the island, trying to shorten the course, right? All right. So again,
Can I ask you to clarify that? So an inside boat, thinking they're getting in the water that's too shallow, can go around the island and say, I need room.
correct. Yeah. So this would be rule 19 would apply. The island's an obstruction. But again, you get into this question about what constitutes safe.
4 times the weight height.
So, but
Depth 4 times the weight height.
yeah, but again, yeah, we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be applying these kinds of rules in those situations, right? The race committee should be smart enough to say there's an offset. And you'll know this in the Volvo Ocean Racing, for example, where it really matters, big money, right? They define zones. You can't go there, okay? They don't leave it open for interpretation of what constitutes safe, okay? Same kind of thing. All right. I'm just going to give examples because I don't want you to try to memorize rules. I just want you to sort of see situations and sort of recognize them and then say, okay, I kind of get it. So whenever you see a 3 boat length circle, it means the rule applies. 2 boats, same tack, approaching. So the main thing here is that when the first guy gets to the circle, my 3 boat length circle, from that point on, I have the right to sail my course if I am on the inside. Okay. Why would it, in a situation where a guy gets there first, why would it ever be that the guy who's coming up from behind would get on the inside of them? Yeah.
What you just said, plus if fetching the mark.
Yeah, if fetching the mark. Yeah, if fetching the mark. Right. Exactly. So, all right. So if you get there, and you get there in this case, this is an example where the inside, the boat that is behind might catch up. Might, because sometimes you have a hole. You sail into a hole. And then the guy from behind, woo, catches up. Okay. Once you get into the 3 boat length circle, you shouldn't be spending any time worrying about whether or not you have to, you should say to yourself or your crew, especially the person, the team behind you, it's a good place to say it, right? 3 boat length circle, no overlap, no rights. So now you could sail your course and they can't get inside and say, you need to give me room. There's no room. I got here before you did. Okay, that's what this is about. Again, the idea is safety, fair. I got here first. You can't mess me up just because you're faster. Okay, so we have to watch out for this because we have multi-speed fleets. Faster boats get there and can close the gap when they weren't inside of the 3 boat length circle, but can close the gap while they're in the 3 boat length circle. They cannot exercise any rights once they get there. So, okay,
So what are the choices for the boat and back? They basically have to slow down.
slow down, or miss the mark,
On the outside.
or miss the mark. Slow down is the best choice, right? All right, so there's an example. Guy tries to get in there, can't get in there. Okay, what happens if this happens to you? What do you do if you're the outside boat? You can protest the other guy. The best thing you can do is to give them room and tell them afterwards that they violated, you owe me a beer, right? If they beat you. But I didn't, you owe me a beer because you didn't have any rights there. You don't want to run them into the mark. That's a silly thing, right? Because that makes life really miserable for everybody. And it's slow for you because if they hit the mark, I guarantee it's going to slow you down. If nothing else, you'll be looking, how do I pick the people out of the water that got thrown overboard? So yeah, you don't want to do that. So go around if you have to, but try to make it clear to the other boat. And then hopefully if it's somebody that you're really good with and you race with a lot, you can avoid it. Okay.
I got a question online.
Yep.
This is from Stephen Klein. Assume 2 starboard tack close hauled boats in the circle of a weather mark to round to port. Can the clear astern boat, assuming close enough, carry the clear ahead boat past the mark as far as she wants, i.e. delay her tacking to round? From rule 18.2b, the boat clear astern must give mark room. From mark room definition, mark room does not include room to tack.
Correct. So the answer is yes. 2 port tack. So the question is 2 port tack boats coming upon a mark, right? And let's say I am the windward boat demanding room at the mark. Okay. So the guy gives me room at the mark, right? And we go by the mark and then we keep going by the mark and he can't tack because why? Because the whole issue of I have no rights to tack. I can't acquire right away because you're too close to me. Can you just keep going? And the answer is yes. Okay. Going to windward. So Stephen's question, can you do the same thing to leeward? The answer is no, because there's a specific rule that prevents you from doing that. There is no such rule yet on the windward side. Okay, and I'll show you, I have an example of it. Okay.
I've got one more question.
Yep.
This is from Sergi. Considering that 3 boat length zone is defined by the whole length of a boat closer to the mark. If fast 40-foot boat is ahead and overlap with an 18-foot boat, once 40-foot boat is rounded, does 18-foot remain in the zone until her rounding or zone gets recalculated in relation to the 18-foot boat with the other boats?
It doesn't get recalculated because it's basically established that the rule is applied to the 2 boats at the time the first one enters. It's irrelevant now whether it gets changed because there's no other boat involved. Okay. However, in fairness to Sergio's a good question. What if he's not racing the 40-foot boat? He's racing the guy behind him. Okay. Then his 3 boat length circle is the one that matters for that contest. And the 40-foot boat's irrelevant. Do you see what I mean? In other words, so if I'm racing you and I have a dinghy, okay, and you're ahead of me, the 3 boat length circle is defined by the first boat that got there. That's you, okay? So now it's a big, huge circle, but I have a tiny boat, but I'm not racing you. I'm racing the other guy who's in the same size boat as me. So you got to the circle first. So that's how big the circle is. Then I got to the circle. My circle is a lot closer. Okay. Then it started again for the guy from behind you. You see what I mean? So as I said, always we're always talking about two boats. So if you have boat A, boat B, and boat C. So B to C is different than A to B. So A has a boat length circle, B has a boat length circle, C has a boat length circle. And it's not really relevant what the circle was with A anymore if it's only between B and C. Does that make sense? Hope you got that. So does that make sense to you, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay. So you only care about the boat length circle for you to make sure that you know that you have the rights to do what you need to do. What happens behind you is no longer relevant anymore. Once you get around in the circle, it doesn't matter what the next guy's circle looks like. It's not, doesn't apply to you. Okay. So here's downwind. Oh, sorry.
Do you mind this question?
Not at all. That's why we're here.
So upwind, this happens a lot. There's a boat barely fetching the mark. They're going to tack around the mark and then stall in their tack.
Yep,
So they are no longer underway.
correct.
What are the right of way? They become just an obstruction to
Correct.
everybody else.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, basically they're an obstruction to everybody else. Exactly right. They're an obstruction if nobody else has a right over them. It's a little tricky, but from a practical point of view, yeah, from a practical point of view, you should treat them as an obstruction. If you want to look at the rules from a perfect point of view, it gets tricky. A boat that's stalled doesn't really have a right over another boat that isn't stalled. So they're not really an obstruction. You follow?
Yep.
But that's weird because we know that that's not what the writers had in mind. A boat that's stalled is a boat that's stalled that you could hit. And therefore, by definition, they are an obstruction, even though they're not. They become an obstruction for a different reason. There are boat racing that's an obstruction because if you hit them, they would cause you a lot of trouble, even though they're not a right-of-way boat. So you can be not right-of-way boat in obstruction, and you can be a right-of-way boat in obstruction, but only if you're going to hit them because. So you'll.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is
I
why.
understand the scenario. Can you say that
The
again?
boat, the lower of those two green boats.
Yeah,
If they're pinching and just barely making the mark and they try to tack and then stall in the tack, they just stop right there at the mark.
Which one? The one, the
The-
lower one?
It's probably going to be the lower one in that case, because they're more likely pitching than the one above them.
Okay, so then become an obstruction, the other boat has to.
They try to tack and they stall right in the middle of their tack.
A perfect example is in a current situation. Let's say the current is running hard as a flood and you're going to windward in our channel, right? You are making it. It's no problem. And then you're not making it. So then you as a skipper, you start pinching the boat. You got to make it, but you pinch it. Now the boat's less efficient. And all of a sudden you're not making it. Maybe both of you aren't making it. Then at some point you say, screw it. We're not going to make it. Let's tack. Emergency tack. You tack, but there's another boat there. So you get stalled out in the tack. It's a mess. Or as many times happened in the racing that I have done, when those currents existed in San Francisco Bay, windward, the guy who got to the mark first wrapped himself around the mark. Okay. Now he and the mark are together and sometimes flipped at the mark. So, you got to go around the whole damn thing, right? So the answer is, yeah, you got to watch out for that. Okay. And which is why, just in general, if you want a performance suggestion for you and your crew and happiness as well, lifelong happiness, is just don't put yourself in a situation where it's tight around the windward mark or the leeward mark, where if something goes wrong, you're in trouble. Okay, give yourself a little extra room. You'll be surprised at how many boats you can pass that way that are struggling because you went a little further. You gave yourself plenty of margin. You tacked over. You went around the mark with lots of margin. You could bear away when you needed to. You weren't pinching. You had time to do things properly. Yeah.
I'll just add in the light air and the light air with current against you at a windward mark. That situation you're describing seems to be happening
All the time, all the time. Yeah. So by the way, a good strategy there is in light air, go as close to the mark as you can on a port tack. Because when you do tack, because then when you do call it, maybe 2-3 boat lengths past the mark, and you tack over, you don't have to go very far before the current will pull you past the mark. So you have if the further away you are, when you tack on to starboard, the more you're going to be pulled down. In light air, it's really hard to judge correctly. But if you're close to the mark, you can judge it pretty well. You can say, well, we're moving at about a knot, maybe that. The current's going about a knot. So if I go 4 boat lengths and tack over, I'm sure I'll make it. Maybe, right? So it depends on the wind. We've Dan's laughing because, of course, it happened to us all recently. So, okay, let's see. Okay, here's an important one. Downwind. Now, remember I said that, anyway, sorry. Okay, downwind. Remember I said that upwind, boats on opposite tacks, 18 does not apply. Remember I said that? Downwind, 18 does apply on opposite tacks. Okay, and here's where you can get caught up. A dying breeze is the scenario you have to imagine. So you can't imagine how is starboard, the green boat, how could he possibly not get around the mark before the red boat gets there? Okay, the answer is dying breeze. Okay, big hole around the mark, and the breeze is coming from the top to the bottom. So the red's coming with speed. The green is waiting, has been in the lead for the longest time, and is now waiting to get around the mark, and is frustrated that everybody else is getting the wind before they get them. And the wind, and they're all coming down with it. Okay, at them at speed. Okay, especially if they have sport boats, they're ripping along, and this guy's sitting there hardly moving at all. Okay, kite's not even full, nothing's happening. Okay, got to the 3 boat length circle before the red boat in his mind, right? But in point of fact, he had an overlap when he got to the 3 boat length circle. You kind of draw the line the way I drew it. If you look at his stern, green boat's stern, and you did a 90-degree across his stern, the red boat would still be inside of it. He's a ways away, but he's still be inside of it. So it's a little mind game. But here's the little thing to remember. 2 boats on opposite tacks downwind are almost always overlapped. Almost always overlapped. By definition, almost always. And the further apart they are, the more overlapped they are. Okay? Which means that if I got there, and it took you 20 minutes to get there, but I didn't move either, I still have, that guy's still going to have the right to go around in front of me or inside of me. Okay, so here's how it looks then when it happened. They finally came together, right? And this guy says, I've got starboard, I should have rights, your port, you should go to heck, you know. The fact of the matter is, no, 18 does apply. It's kind of a place to trick you up. Okay, a lot of novices get messed up here. You guys aren't novices, but don't get fooled by that. Don't let somebody on your boat yell, well, it's port, port, port. It's like, no, wait a minute. They're inside. They're trying to get on the inside of us, and they've had overlap probably forever. Okay. And you won't even have looked at your 3 boat length circle when this happens to you. Because the guy will be so far away, you won't even think about it. But you're sitting there frustrated because there's no wind. That's how this happens. If there's speed, it never happens. Okay. Situation, same thing. Now here's a statement about overlap when you're coming to a 3 boat length circle. And the answer is the following. Question is, what if it's not sure? What if we're not sure if there was overlap? Let's say we're kind of going like this. Overlap, unoverlap, overlap, unoverlap. We're going together downwind. Okay. When I get to the 3 boat length circle, if I was overlapped before I got to the 3 boat length circle, then the assumption is the overlap that was there. It didn't get broken. Conversely, if I was leading the whole way down and the guy comes from behind and claims he caught me just before the 3 boat length circle, the rule says, no, it goes to the guy who has, if there's any doubt, it goes that if there has not been an overlap for the longest time, then it's assumed that the overlap was not made in time. Okay. It's because if you get to a race committee, there'll be 2 people saying there was, one says there was an overlap, the other one says there's overlap. How's the race committee supposed to know? Okay. So they wrote this for the race committee. It says, ask the guys, what was at position 1? What was at position 2? If position 1, you didn't have overlap, at position 2, you didn't have overlap, at position 3, you claim that you had overlap, they're going to say, nope, according to this rule, you didn't have overlap. Conversely, if the opposite was true, I had overlap in position 1, overlap in position 2, but I broke overlap just before we got to the 3-boat length circle, they'll say, if you had overlap all the way, it's going to be assumed that the overlap did not get broken.
So I thought a racing tactic was to break the overlap by changing your course.
Yeah, it is absolutely a tactic that is discussed in the books. Very interesting tactic. It will never, ever work in a race committee.
Okay.
Because you're going to show position 1, you're going to show position 2, and then you're going to show position 3 that it changed. And the other guy's going to say it didn't change. But if you all agree that if the overlap was there at 1 and the overlap was there at 2, and then you argue you broke overlap at 3, they're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're going to use this rule against you.
So like in that picture, the lead boat, they were outside the boat the circle, but in that same configuration, the lead boat turns downwind 30, 40 degrees, they will break the overlap.
Correct.
But that doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Doesn't work. It's fun to do in a dinghy, but it's not, it doesn't work. All right. So, and by the way, if you do have the rights to go around, let's say you got to the 3-boat length circle downwind, you have the right to go around and make a turn that you would normally make. This is not as close as you can be, but you can make a J turn. So suppose you really want to make that J turn shown here. So sometimes that gets interpreted as you're opening the door for the guy. Because I went a little bit deep and then I came up. Now I want to finish that mark going upwind as close to it as possible, head to wind. I mean, not head to wind, close haul, right? I don't want to go like that and then try to pull my sails in, right? So if you've gotten clear, you're head clear, you have the right to be a little bit open. So don't get fooled about trying to stick yourself in there just because the guy's going a little bit low, unless it looks like he can't put his kite away or something, and then maybe that works. Okay. Okay. Here is, let's see, when mark room has been given okay. So once you've given mark room for somebody, the rule says that once I've given you room, the rule turns off. Now we're back to normal. In other words, you don't, it doesn't just continue at perpetuity. In other words, if I gave you room, now it's windward, leeward, port, starboard, all applies. Once I've given you room around the mark, then we've satisfied the requirements of 18. That's what that basically says. It doesn't really create much of a problem anywhere. Once you've created room for somebody, chances are you won't close the door on them. Once they're in there, you're not likely to drive your boat into them. You see them, you already know that they're you're not going to do that. So, okay. Also, the same thing is true if I go around a mark, the thing turns off. So here's a scenario. Again, I've just given you an example in some scenarios. Here's a scenario where I'll take you forward. We went around the mark, but I had a different plan than you had. Mark was in the first boat. He wanted to go straight downwind. Okay, he wanted to go on course B. Philip, who's coming from behind, he wants to go on course A. Okay. Or rather, I'm sorry, the other way around. I want to go straight down. Mark wants to go right. So Mark, he's on port. He wants to keep going. He can't, right? Because I'm coming at him. And port starboard, 18 doesn't matter anymore. We've passed the mark. Now we just have your basic port starboard scenario. Okay. Does that make sense? So here we were coming. Be aware that I was given mark room. Or Mark was given mark room. Mark was in front. He had his mark room. He said, look, I have all the rights. Nobody can bother me. You got around the mark. There's boats coming from behind you. You're past the mark, but you've lost now. Now the rule doesn't apply anymore. That's the important point. The boats coming from behind might be on starboard. And you want to go to port, let's say. And you have to be careful, because if you do that, you can't block them. Okay. So once you've gotten your mark room, You got for a short period of time, you had a yellow card, you got to get out of jail, everything was great. Once you pass the mark, you're back to red. Basic rules apply. Okay. Looking at your eyes to make sure everybody got it, which is what's great about having you here. Thank you so much. All right. Okay, this is the same game about overlap. I've already talked about that. You can read the language. Okay, if in doubt, there's no overlap. If in doubt, the overlap wasn't broken. So it depends on what was happening before you got there. Okay, this is kind of a strange one. I don't want you to spend too much time thinking about it, but you can look at it because this happens so infrequently. This is one of the reasons we don't like race committees to put starboard rounding turns, because people are so used to everything being on port, starboard. Starboard turns are problematic. Notice on a starboard rounding, oh, this is a port rounding, but this is a port rounding where everybody wants to go around on a port tack. So the starboard tack boat isn't making it, you see? So right, they're going to tack, so they're going to not have any mark room, right? So what's going to happen is they're going to tack right here and try to ask for room. Okay, and if there was no room at the time they finish the tack, they don't get any room. Okay, and that's what this rule says. 18.2.f, and I've never ever seen anybody apply this rule to anything. But just be aware that if everyone wants to go on a port tack, let's say there's great current relief, so you got everybody coming in on port, and this guy's over here on starboard and realize, oh shoot, I should have gotten inside, but I can be ahead of everybody. He gets in there, but does it right at the mark. That's where the problem could exist. Okay. Right. Should have tacked earlier and come at the mark on starboard. That's what should have happened.
I just want to clarify the right strategy for the green boat is to
Tack now. Tack now.
tack before, tack a boat that's.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter inside the circle or not. Tack now. Tack back onto starboard. Doesn't matter because I'm coming at you on starboard and you're on port. You have no rights. Why? What do we know about Rule 18? It does not apply on boats on opposite tacks. So the circle becomes irrelevant. So the right strategy is to always approach, you want to be safe, mark, whatever, always approach your mark on a starboard tack with plenty of room to count for the current. Everybody's got to stay out of your way, in theory. Okay, just make sure nobody hits you, but you are completely in the right place. Okay.
But tacking inside the circle
doesn't change anything. Okay, doesn't change anything because you tack back and now you're on starboard, and the rule turns off. Two boats opposite tacks. No Rule 18 anymore. Okay.
Got a question.
Yeah.
If the starboard boat makes the mark, the ports have to duck though, right?
Yes, correct. Correct. Absolutely. So in this scenario, if the current was working for the starboard boat, let's say it's a big ebb in our scenario, he's getting carried up. Great. No problem. 18 doesn't apply. There is no 3-boat link circle. It's not relevant. It's just a mark. Okay. And that's a good one to always point out. Somebody says, I want room, and they're on opposite tacks. You're like, if you're going upwind, by what rule? There is no room rule in the A card. So, okay, you look really good. Just don't hit them. So, all right. Tacking within the zone is a little tricky. If you tack within the zone, notice that the red guy has no rights, right? Rule 18 doesn't apply, opposite tacks, right? But he does tack. Okay. Now it does apply. Okay. Doesn't matter that he tacked in the zone, it applies. Okay. As long as he doesn't try to shove the guy past close hauled. Can't push him up. But if the guy's fetching, you know, gave himself lots of room, overstood the mark, maybe fetching, this guy says, no, I'm going to be in there, gets in there, and enough time passed. Again, under the rule acquiring right of way, you have to allow for 3, 4, 5 seconds. Now, here's an important point, and it's a little side note, sometimes it's misunderstood. 4 or 5 seconds is enough time for someone to slow their boat down. Okay? The rule doesn't say that you have to speed up to their speed. You gave them time to slow down. They should slow down. Okay? The rule doesn't say, well, look, you went in front of me and I had to slow down. It's like, yeah. Did you? Could you? Was there enough time? If there was, too bad. I'm a slow boat. Knock yourself out. Okay. So, all right. If you acquire right of way and you tack inside the zone, then that's fine. Okay. As long as you allowed time, again, the whole normal rules, enough time for the other person to have done what you did. And again, here's the another important part about this rule is that it's you do not when you tack the time, the clock starts when you finished your tack. Not did I give you 5 seconds before I tacked to know that I was going to tack, so that then you had plenty of time because you could have anticipated my tack. The rule is very clear. You don't have to anticipate anything. Until the guy's on starboard, he's not on starboard. So the clock doesn't start until he gets on the starboard. Okay. And then the person should not be so close as to not allow themselves time. Okay.
Is there a precise definition of when you got to start?
The rule, you can look at this. It says keeping clear. It says acquiring right of way. It says you have to keep clear of the boat. What does keep clear mean? It just simply says this seamanship statement. Okay. So it's so it would go then to the race committee, to the protest committee to decide whether you were being reasonable or not. And then depends on the race committee who decides whether that was reasonable for you to do or not. And so I would say in close situations, get used to counting to yourself. It's always a good idea to have some idea how long something takes, also for your crew. So if you don't know off the top of your head in 10 knots of breeze, 15 knots of breeze, and 20 knots of breeze, how long it takes your crew to take the kite, put it down so that you can now control the boat and turn it, you should know that number. You should know that it's a 10 count. And maybe you want to make it an 8 count or whatever, but you should know what that number looks like so that you have a pretty good idea of how long you should wait before you yell for them to take the kite down. That's an example. That's your question?
Yes.
Yes, sort of.
Thought of another one. Oh, yeah. So if you tack in front of them, you're now starboard, and they successfully avoid you.
Yep.
Then
Correct.
they'll fall, right?
No foul.
So only if they hit you.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Right. Right. But now what do you want? You don't want them to
You
hit
don't
you
want
under
to hit
any
me, no.
circumstances, right? So I'm just giving you some rule of thumb. Best idea is to have an idea who you just tacked in front of. You know, I'll tack in front of Peter all day long, or Anya, I should say, because she's very quick and she sees, but drives her crazy. So we wouldn't want to do that to her either. But she's very talented and probably can handle a lot with her team. I wouldn't do it to somebody who's got a whole new fresh team on their boat, because they may take forever to do what you think they should be able to do in a matter of 4 or 5 seconds. So just kind of have that in your mind and sail accordingly. Okay. This is that whole statement about how you can't, remember Stephen asked about holding somebody off, going to windward. You can't do that to leeward. Sooner or later, they're going to change the rule on the windward side, by the way, I'm almost guaranteed, but you can't do it to leeward. To leeward, you can't sail past the mark, okay, before you jibe. Okay, so the inside boat in this case, right, this boat has the right of way. It's not only he's not only the right of way boat because he's the leeward boat, but he's also the inside boat. But he can't just keep going, okay, unless it's a gate. And if it's a gate, he can keep going, even if he doesn't go to the other gate. Weird, but I mean, let's say he goes through, but he keeps going, doesn't turn up soon enough. He can do that. There's no limitation on a gate. So that's what the rule says, all right? Okay, we're done with 18 and 19, the hardest ones of all. So all you have to remember is when you're looking in your book and you're not sure what happened, try to remember the scenarios I just described. The key, if you're not sure about the best way to go about approaching a mark, my advice to you is to stay as away from the mark. Do not try to, so here's the basic fundamental advice to you. Do not try to pass somebody at the mark. Avoid that temptation. Absolutely pass somebody after the mark. And you can and will successfully pass them after the mark if you didn't try to pass them before the mark. Have a better takedown. Let them get around the mark first, at the leeward mark, for example, but finish attack your takedown and be coming up and going perfectly upwind when you go by the mark. And you will pass, very likely pass the boat that didn't do as good a job, that was rushed at the leeward mark. Pass after the mark, do not pass before the mark. You avoid the temptation. And it's very tempting because people are slowing down. This is my chance, do not pass there. And you will find yourself more times than not avoiding most conflict, sailing clear, sailing a lot faster than the guys that are behind you who are trying to, duke it out with the people, okay? And you'll also, you also have more fun because you're more relaxed. And your team will really appreciate it because they won't feel stressed. It's very stressful on a team to be taking kites down and all the noise and all that stuff. So, all right. Okay. So roomed attack is something that we talked about a little bit before. Remember, we were talking about when you had the boats, when you had those two boats coming upwind and you had a bunch of starboard boats. And I said that the leeward guy could decide where to go. He could also call for roomed attack. So roomed attack is something you get to do, only applies upwind. Again, remember, it does not apply downwind. Cannot call for roomed attack downwind. Only when you're going upwind. Close home. Okay? It's a very specific place that it's designed for. Okay? And it's just exactly what you see here. And the leeward boat has the right to decide to take the starboard boat stern. If he does, he has to allow room for the other boat to come with him. Or, so I don't do that. I'm going to attack. Let's say he's getting close to the ley line. Then he can call for room attack. That's the classic situation for room attack. Okay. And it's a hail, and it can also be now, according to the rules, you can use a horn. If the SIs say a horn is acceptable, because people know that it's hard to hear. So they changed the rule that says if the SI says horn is an acceptable hail, then you can do it that way. Okay. Again, a lot of these rules were built for sort of Olympic, dinghy, where you could hear one another pretty easily. Okay, that's the basic rule. Some special cases where it doesn't apply. Think about fairness. You can't ask for room to attack if the other guy's making the mark and you're not. Right? You understood. You have the right of way, but you understood you missed the mark, and he's making the mark. Now you have the right of way over that person, but you can't say I need to tack, and you need to tack. So he can say, go ahead, tack, as long as he thinks you can make it. But you can't force him to tack if he's making the mark. And that's a very specific rule. They added after the fact, they kind of realized, oh, this is a fairness problem. Let's put a caveat in the rule. Okay. Does that make sense? So when you're fetching the mark, you can't be told that the other guy to tack for the other guy if he has the right of ways over you. Okay. So an example of the same kind of thing is this. Dave called this the coffin corner. So this is the case of two committee boats, typically two committee boats, and you're both coming on the line to a start, and the guy wants to call for room to tack, and because he's going to get stuck behind the committee boat, and you can't call it there, okay, because it's a 21.1 special case. Okay, again, I wrote it because I said this happens sometimes. Doesn't happen hardly ever for us. Almost always there's no boat there. It's just another mark. You don't have to give the guy room at a mark. You can't call. Anyway, the point is this is not a place where you'd call for room attack. So do not be calling for room to tack at the start because you can't use it there, is the bottom line. Not surprising, right? Like, I'd like to tack. Yeah, sure. We're 10 seconds from the start. That's very interesting, but no, you gotta stay where you are. Okay. Make sense? Okay. So, here's a trap that you could use, a potential trap that could catch you out. The leeward boat calls for room to tack, which he can do, right? And you say, yeah, and you miss the mark. Okay. Generally speaking, the rules could be used as a tactical advantage. If you find yourself using the rules to try to trap somebody, you're probably using them in a way that's not, it might work once or twice in your life, but don't use them that way. You're going to find yourself getting yourself into trouble. This happens a lot with dinghy racers because they get used to using these cute little things like this one to kind of mess somebody up. And then they go and try to do this with a 40-foot racing boat, and it doesn't work. It just causes damage. Okay. Right. So yes, you can use the rules as a tactical advantage. Don't use it for fairness and for safety, and you're going to be safe. Right. This is just a reminder that if you have a bunch of boats and you ask for room to tack, it has to be hailed on. So think about that for a second before you think about asking for room for one, because one has to ask another, one has to ask another. Will all that happen before the time comes? Maybe not. So again, a little bit situationally aware. Is this even going to work? Okay. Good example of this in a racing environment. When I was racing some of the races that I did, the lines were very big. They were 60 to 100 boats on the line, on a starting line. Okay, somebody comes in, hooks, finds a hole, hooks on the line. Everybody's lined up on a start. Imagine 30 seconds before a start, minute before a start. Everybody's parked, lined up, really working the boats. Somebody comes in, sticks their nose in, they're late. And they stick their nose in, they hook inside of it, they find a spot, they get a spot, and then they tell everybody up, 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 up. Because they think they can somehow get 35 boats all to move before 30 seconds happens. So what does the first guy do that he's next to? Nothing. Moves a little. Next guy says, I'm not moving at all. And so the point is, just because you can call for it doesn't mean it's going to happen. Okay, so be situationally aware.
Can we go back one? So in that case, the middle boat cannot cause the right boat to sail above close haul.
Exactly.
Right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Exactly right. Can't head them up. Can't like stuff them up into it. We don't see too much luffing. I haven't seen that hardly in any of our races.
But if he's just making the
Have
mark,
we seen it? Okay.
if he's just making the mark, you can't get in there. Right? If he's right on the lay line, that right boat.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
That doesn't have to be the late one.
well, I mean, he says if he was right on the ley line, just making it, and you parked yourself there, anything you did would put him above close home.
But there's also different lay lines for different boats.
Exactly right.
That's true.
So exactly right. So all of these things are, again, you find yourself in there. It's like, why did I do that? What was the point of that? That was, I should have just gone on up. Okay. All right. Okay. And as I said, in the new rules, you can use a horn. Okay. Room to tack in a situation like this, right, is interesting because he's using the boundary as his room to tack. He's asking for room to tack because he's coming upon a boundary. And actually, if he does get the tack in this particular case, the important point is, and I've had this happen, people, I wanted room to tack. Cool, you gave me room to tack. Oh, now I want a room to keep sailing. Oh, no. Once you've tacked, you got your room. Now where are you? You got to duck me. That's the important thing, right? The important point is that once you've gotten what you asked for, you have to then respond next, because the rules are all that rule's done. Now we're on to the new rule. We're back to port starboard. And in this particular case, he had room to tack, but then he says, well, I don't want to go back because then I'll just have to do it again. No, you actually have to duck me or slow down. And if you start to tack back, well, then you have no rights either because you're now tacking. Okay, so just because you came off a boundary. Now, the reason this gets confusing is because people watch things like SailGP. And SailGP has its own special rules. And one of its special rules is a boundary rule, which said, look, we have this problem like this. We're going to create a zone around the boundaries, which we don't have any of those things. But they created as, just for your information, they created a zone that said that zone is this big. And once you tack in the zone, you are protected while you are in that zone. So this zone would have been big enough that this guy would have had room. But you watch these things and then you say, well, if they can do it, how come I can't do it? Well, the answer is they have boundaries. They have zones around the boundaries, and it's written into the rules special for them. And we don't have such zones around boundaries. So if you have to ask for room to tack, or if you tack because you came to a boundary and you tack, now you've got to make sure that when you do tack, you duck somebody or slow down or avoid them, because you'll be coming back at them on port.
I don't think I understand. If there was that much room, you wouldn't call for tack. You just.
I know,
tack
but
and
he
you
could have.
duck 'em.
He could have
Oh,
called for room. There's nothing in the rule that says he can't call for room here.
okay,
He's coming upon a boundary.
okay.
He's calling for room. Fine. You call for room. Rule doesn't say you can't call for room. Only if you have an obstacle. I have an obstacle. I'm calling for room. It's just that once he gets that room, he doesn't continue. That's what's confusing, because a lot of times we were bouncing off the shoreline up in some of our national races, and the boats that were hitting the shoreline first called for room to tack. They would tack, but they would then come back upon other boats, and they said, "Well, I just finished calling for room, so I still get room." No, you don't. You finish tacking. You're done.
Maybe the scenario I had not too long ago is these two boats are so close to each other. I was a leeward one. There is no room for me to tack other than if the other boat tacks.
And then you can call for room to tack, and they have to tack.
Yes, exactly.
That's correct. And then you don't have the problem because you both tack.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Then you don't have the problem, which is what it's intended for. But again, just to the point, you can call for room anytime you want, as long as you're going upwind.
We're just adding this for clarity, that the option of the green boat that needs to give the room can be just hailed back, you tack.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. Thank you. That's a good reminder.
That's different.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you have the right to just, yeah, I think I had it once before. I think I had it here somewhere, but anyway, yes, correct. Okay. So slow down, do something. All right. Well, those are all the hard rules. We're done. That's it. Okay. Everything else is section D. Section D now only has 3 rules, not 4. And they really just say the obvious. If you are stopped, stalled, going backwards at the starting line, you don't have any rights. You can't sail the boat backwards. So let's say you just come to a complete stop on the starting line. You're not on port, you're not on starboard, you're going backwards. Basically, you got to stay away from everybody, which is really tricky.
You can't move.
Exactly. So what do you do if you want to run into that guy? That's silly. So, I mean, the point is be aware that that happens to people. And then remember, Yep.
There's no wind at the starting line. Now I'm anchored.
You
Does
have-
that change any rules?
yeah, it does. It right here. It shows it right here.
Okay.
Number 22.
Yes.
You have the right of way if you're anchored.
Okay.
And if the other guy is floating towards you because he's not anchored, he can foul you. It's a weird rule, but it absolutely happened. It's 3 Bridge fiasco. So the guys who anchor first are safe from the guys who aren't anchored. Weird.
I still get a dent in your boat, but at least you're on the right. Yeah.
Exactly. And then 23 is a simple rule that just simply says you can't go interfere with somebody else's race while they're racing. Classic example is I go around the leeward mark and I want to beat Stan, and Stan goes around the leeward mark and he wants to beat me. And the way he's going to do that is just go mess with me, as opposed to sailing to the finish, which he could do.
Philip, you keep walking out of camera, so.
Sorry, I'm not used to it. So that's interfering. You go back and you're sailing, all of a sudden Stan's sailing around me, and You know, another perfect example is he finishes, but it's important that he beats me by somebody gets between us. So he goes mess around with me. He's not racing anymore, right? That would be interference. That's what that's about. Okay. So
The defense in my case is I'm sailing a proper course, that's all better wind.
exactly right. You can do all of that.
Even after you finish three.
No,
Just
no,
messed up,
no.
right?
Okay, so here's my summary. So do think about the fact that you already know pretty much everything you need to know, and just this is really sharpening your saw. I think you guys already knew it. It's just a good reminder. Some of these cases are useful to remind because you don't see them all the time. But remember that the primary rules are the red ones, and you know these cold. And the biggest problem you're going to have is you're going to run into somebody you didn't see. So that's the one you want to avoid. So that's the second thing. The second thing in this is do try when you're trying to learn the rule and something you're confused about, do try one of these position diagrams in having a discussion, because it can be very helpful for you to then look at the rules and see how it applies. It's a mistake that is often made. And the reason is at position 2, I had the right of way. At position 3, I didn't have the right of way, but somehow I keep remembering that I had the right of way at 2, so therefore I must be the right of way boat. You see what I mean? So if the right of way changes from 2 to 3, then the right of way changed. Okay, and if enough time passed between 2 and 3, then the simple rules would apply, and 3 is what counts, not what happened at 1 and not what happened at 2. And so lots of people, they remember the whole thing as a whole sequence, and at some point they had the right of way, and then they lost it, but they want to keep saying I had the right of way. And so that's why those position diagrams are useful. They're also very useful if you ever look at a case study trying to understand how the rule was interpreted. You'll need to be, that's how it's going to be presented to you. So when you get used to looking at it and you've built a few, you'll be good at it. 6 feet, I think we all kind of ought to agree 6 feet's a good number. It's comfortable for most of us, a little close for some, but at least it's reasonable, I think. Make sure you always have everybody. It's good if you've got somebody on the boat, a bowman who really knows it's their job to call for impact, but if not that, everybody. Nothing is easier to understand than where I point the boat. So Hans will never get nervous if I'm coming at him, if I'm not, at any time when I'm coming at him, I'm not pointing at him. It's not going to make him nervous. It's like, I can't see how he could hit me if he keeps going the way he is going. So if I want to tell Hans what I'm going to do, I put my nose where he can see it. I see him, he sees me, he knows my nose is not pointing to him. I have to change my direction to hit him. And he's like, okay, good, I don't have to worry about him. I'll move on to the next guy because he showed me what he intended to do. Okay, so if you do the same thing, if you want to duck, don't wait till the last minute to duck. Show that you intend to duck by putting your bow down deep and then start to come back up again. Guy sees your bow down deep, knows you see him, and then life is good. Then you can go about your business and you can trust, hopefully, that he won't steer up into you. Hopefully. And then, as I said, give room whenever possible. So you'll find it's faster. I have kind of a performance slide so I can say we did some performance things. My best advice for performance racing, and it's worked for me for years. It doesn't mean you'll win, but it certainly works. And that is that remember that if you sail clear, and that is away from other boats whenever you can. Whenever you can sail away from other boats, your boat is going to go as well as it can go. Okay. The second thing is keep your team very relaxed, because when things get tense, their performance goes way down. So, and when you get tense, that's why knowing the rules is so important. If you know the rules, you're not tense. You kind of know how this is going to go. You anticipated it. Look ahead, see the race course, kind of say, I'm going to go around everybody this time. I'm not going to try to pass at the mark where it gets really hairy. And I have to kind of remember every single nuance. I'm going to go around people, and that will make you relaxed. Your team will be relaxed. You'll be surprised. And then last but not least, you can't sail somebody else's boat. And people do this all the time. Concentrate on making your boat go fast. And the perfect example is you're going upwind. And if you ever get somebody calling you upwind that the other boat's climbing higher than you are, what are they doing? They're sailing the other boat. They're sailing your boat by the other boat. Well, they're assuming that that you are in exactly the same wind and that you've fallen off. Happens all the time. Okay, so just remind your crew, we're sail our boat. It's okay to tell me that Stan's ahead. He's always ahead. It's okay to tell me that, but don't tell me that he's pointing higher. It doesn't help me. And tell me that I need to come up because the sail's luffing, or come down because the sail's luffing, or because look at my boat, sail my boat. That's fine. And then tell me where the other guys are. Great, but don't sail another person's boat. And we aren't, generally speaking, match racing does not work. Generally speaking, okay, it's slow for those two boats. And in a fleet race, nothing is better than having two boats compete with one another while you are off sailing your own boat and not worrying about them, because they will go slower. So if you want to work on performance, you work on those three things, and you're likely to have a pretty good time on the water. Okay. So that is, I think, everything I have. There's a little picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys online. Sorry for stepping out of the screen and all of the things I did. Should have been here.
No more questions online.
We have a bar here.
We have a bar here. All right. Okay. Thank you, Tom, very much.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks
everyone.
everyone.
That
That
ends today's seminar. Thanks for joining.